Part 22. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 211. At the end of the calculation, 25% of your and Chen Tao's children are male humans, 25% are female humans, 25% are male dragons, and 25% are female dragons. Human. Therefore, the chance of Chen Tao getting you pregnant with a male dragon is 25%. A mechanical sound sounded in this huge academy. Hearing this voice, Katie looked at Chen Tao, with a smile on her face and said, "That is to say, there is only a quarter chance. I think, dear, we have to work harder." Hearing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and his high-spirited heart slowly relaxed. It seems that she is overthinking, and Katie must have asked the academy to calculate it before. If the chance is really 0, then of course she cannot be with Chen Tao. Katie looked at Vario beside her and said, "This is the Dragon King's academy. If you want to know anything, you can ask the academy directly. It can give you any knowledge you want to know." Wei Lian nodded slightly, crossed her arms and said, "This thing is quite convenient." Chen Tao watched this scene. Chen Tao entered the genetic channel shared by dragons and said, "All the dragons in Dragon City, listen. We will gather at the Dragon Hall in 1 hour. I have something to announce." "Yes. Yes." In the genetic channel, the dragons responded in unison. Wei Lia's eyes brightened slightly, and she looked at Chen Tao. Welia also heard various voices ringing from her brain just now. After all, Chen Tao had just pulled Wei Lia into the Dragon People's public genetic channel. In an instant, hearing so many voices, no wonder Wei Lia was surprised. Chen Tao said, "That is the genetic function of Dragon People. What we just entered is the genetic channel. In that channel, all Dragon People can hear what we say." Wei Lia nodded slightly and said, "It's really convenient." Chen Tao smiled. Katie looked at Chen Tao. She knew what Chen Tao wanted to announce, but she said nothing and just watched quietly. Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao and said, "Then I need to study here and ask it some questions. If you are fine, you can go about your own business." Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. She was not polite at all. However, it is normal, after all, it is Wei Lia. Chen Tao said, "Okay, I will come over in an hour. I have to let the dragons know you. This will facilitate your future work." Wei Lia nodded slightly and said, "Okay." Chen Tao looked at Katie and said, "Let's go." Katie hummed. The two figures disappeared from the spot. Chen Tao took Katie to Katie's bedroom. Standing in the bedroom, Chen Tao looked at Katie and said, "What do you think of Valia?" Katie said, "I have seen her data in the Dragon King's Academy. Just like the results calculated by the Dragon King's Academy, she does have special leadership abilities." She looked at Chen Tao and said, "I tested her just now, and she was not afraid of my aura. She was even able to refute me and find out my mistakes. She will indeed be a qualified leader." But Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, "The leader calculated by the computer is different from the truly suitable leader. I quite like your leadership style." Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled helplessly, "I'm still not suitable. I know how much I weigh. I'm just an ordinary person, and my wish is the same as ordinary people's. It's enough to have a family and be accompanied by a confidant." Katie's eyebrows stretched slightly and she said, "No, you have a kind heart. Kindness is very important." Hearing this, Chen Tao fell silent for a moment. Is kindness important? Not necessarily. Looking at the emperors of ancient and modern times, few of the truly successful and meritorious emperors were kind. It can be seen that kindness is not the key to becoming an emperor. Chen Tao looked at Katie beside him. Katie had just changed out of her silver armor and put on a casual nightgown. Thin white trimmed with gold, it looks luxurious and holy. "Katie, like Chen Tao, was looking at the floor-to-ceiling windows in front of her and the scenery in the distance, with a smile on her face, the happy smile of a girl. "Look at this beautiful Katie in front of you." Chen Tao walked over, came to Katie, and hugged Katie into his arms. Katie was slightly startled. She raised her face and looked into Chen Tao's eyes. Their eyes met, a blush appeared on Katie's face, and she said, "What do you want to do?" Chen Tao looked into Katie's eyes and said with a smile, "Didn't you just ask the Academy to calculate the probability of us having a child? In this case, we have to grasp the time more. There is still 1 hour. In this hour, we cherish it more." Hearing this, Katie blushed a little and said, "Well, okay. Very well behaved." Chen Tao sent Katie to bed. An hour later. Chen Tao is hugging Katie gently. Katie is like a kitten, nestled in Chen Tao's arms. Her long and narrow eyelashes and big eyes are shining with a hint of luster. The corners of her mouth are slightly raised, and her face is filled with a look unique to little women. Sense of happiness. Seeing Katie's expression, Chen Tao smiled and stroked her hair and back gently, soothing her little emotions. The 1 hour time is up suddenly, a voice sounded behind Chen Tao and Katie. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao was slightly startled. He turned sideways and took a look. But he found that Valia was standing by the French window with his arms around his chest, looking at the scenery outside. Seeing this scene, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, got off the bed, put on his clothes, looked at Valia, and said, "How did you get here?" Valia turned her head to look at Chen Tao and said, "The Dragon King's Academy can give me all the answers I want to know. Since it can give me the answers I want to know, I know how to find your location and how to get to you." Chen Tao's eyes were full of novelty, and he said, "Do you know how to use a micro wormhole?" If Valia asked, the Dragon King's Academy would certainly give her a way to get here. At present, there is only one way to get here from the Dragon King's Academy, and that is to use a micro wormhole. To master a micro wormhole, you need talent. Valia has mastered it? Valia said, "I got it." Chen Tao and Katie looked at each other, and both smiled. It seems that Valia is not only a natural leader, but also a scientific genius. Chen Tao said, "Okay, let's go." He stood up and looked at Katie. Katie seemed to remember, and Chen Tao approached Katie, kissed her forehead, and said, "Rest well in bed. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 212. Facing Chen Tao's gentle eyes, Katie's eyes shone with a hint of light. She smiled, hummed, and lay back obediently. Looking at Katie's obedient appearance, Chen Tao nodded slightly, pulled up the sheet and covered her. He then stood up and opened a micro wormhole. Chen Tao stepped into the micro wormhole, and Valia glanced at Katie, who was lying lazily on the bed. She retracted her sight and followed Chen Tao into the micro wormhole. Valia felt a slight light around her, and she found that the surrounding environment had changed. She was standing on the high platform, looking down. You can see the female dragons lined up in rows below, wearing silver-white armor and silver-white helmets. There are so many people, and they are densely packed below. It looks very neat and very disciplined. Valia can feel a majestic breath coming towards her. This is a warrior. A real warrior. Compared to the mob in Qaeda, Valia felt that these warriors in front of him were more like warriors. Are these dragon people? Valia looked at Chen Tao beside him. Chen Tao was wearing casual clothes and looked very casual. He didn't look like a king at all. Chen Tao sat down on a high chair by himself. As soon as he sat down, the group of dragon warriors below immediately moved, clenched their fists, placed them on their left hearts, knelt on one knee, lowered their heads, and looked respectful. "King." The neat voice resounded throughout the hall. Hearing this voice, Valia's eyes lit up. This is a real army, Valia said to herself. Too powerful. Although Valia has not seen the power of these dragon warriors in front of him, Valia can feel their strength just by the majesty and discipline of this army. Such a powerful army, why are they so respectful to Chen Tao? Valia looked at Chen Tao. Is this man very powerful? Chen Tao said calmly, everyone, get up. The group of dragon warriors stood up after hearing Chen Tao's words. When Chen Tao saw that they all stood up, he said, I asked you all to come here because I have something important to announce. The indifferent voice was full of majesty. Valia was slightly startled, and she looked at Chen Tao. At this moment, Valia could feel the aura emanating from Chen Tao, which was the aura of the king. Valia's eyes had a hint of surprise, and she frowned slightly. Thinking to herself, did I make a mistake? Valia, Chen Tao said. Valia was slightly startled, she frowned, took a slow step, and walked down the stairs from the high platform. Then she knelt on one knee in front of Chen Tao, with her hand on her left heart. Valia, meet my king. Chen Tao said, get up. Valia slowly stood up. Chen Tao said, the sister you see in front of you is named Valia. She is the daughter of our dragon warrior Lacey. From today on, she will return to our dragon city and become a warrior of our dragon city. Only Chen Tao's voice could be heard in the whole field. When Chen Tao's voice fell, the surroundings were very quiet. This discipline is shocking. Chen Tao said, Valia is born with strong leadership ability, so from now on, I will let Valia become the heart of the Dragon King. She will contribute her leadership ability to help us protect the balance of the universe. No one spoke. Chen Tao looked at Longren Qin and Longren Jiao. Dragon King's right claw is Longren Qin, and Dragon King's left claw is Longren Jiao. Longren Qin walked out and saluted, Qin is here. Longren Jiao also walked out, saluted, and said, Jiao is here. Chen Tao said, in the future, if you have any questions, just ask Valia directly. Her answer is my answer. Longren Jiao and Longren Qin looked at each other. Seeing the reactions of the two women, Chen Tao said, do you have any questions? No, the king's meaning is our wish. Longren Qin and Longren Jiao spoke at the same time. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, very good. Chen Tao looked at Valia beside him and said, you are now a member of the dragon people, and you need to change your equipment. As he said that, Chen Tao raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Snap. Valia's armor turned into a silver-white color, and the long sword in her hand also turned into a silver-white long sword. Valia was slightly startled, she raised her hand to look at the armor in her hand, and then looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, you can slowly learn how to use this equipment. So today's matter is here, everyone retreat and do your own things. Yes. The deafening voice sounded again. Chen Tao stood up slightly, looked at Valia, and said, Valia, follow me. Valia nodded slightly. Chen Tao and Valia disappeared together. The two returned to the bedroom. Valia looked at Chen Tao in front of her, her eyes shone with a strange light. Noticing the change in Valia's eyes, Chen Tao said, what's wrong? Valia looked at Chen Tao seriously again, and said, it seems that I was wrong. Chen Tao was slightly startled, what do you mean by wrong? Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao and said, you usually look very casual, but at critical moments, you are completely different from usual. I take back my previous judgment of you. You have the potential to be a leader, but not that stabilize. Chen Tao blinked. He did not expect that Wei Lia would change his evaluation of himself. Chen Tao said, to be honest, I have never considered myself a leader, and I don't think there is anything fun about being a leader. The reason why I called you here is to use your leadership skills to help me. Wei Lia crossed her arms, looked at Chen Tao, and said, you are quite honest. Chen Tao said, I don't think there is any need to hide it from you. Wei Lia said, thank you for your trust. I cherish your trust in me. However, I also frankly admit that I have no interest in being a leader. The reason why I am willing to help you is for you." After finishing speaking, she looked at Chen Tao, the luster in her eyes, everyone knew what it meant. Chen Tao touched the back of his head. Wei Lia crossed her arms across her chest, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "There's still half a month left. You think I might have another love, but what I want to tell you is that during this time, I'm becoming more and more obsessed with you." Chen Tao smiled, "I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing." Wei Lia withdrew her gaze and looked at the scenery outside. "I think it's a good thing." Looking at Wei Lia's tall and perfect figure, Chen Tao was silent for a moment and waited for half a month. Wei Lia is perfect and seems unattainable. Such an unattainable person is now pursuing Chen Tao so crazily. Frankly speaking, it is impossible for Chen Tao not to be tempted. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 213. Then I'll go back to the Dragon King's Academy first. Seeing that Chen Tao didn't speak, Wei Lia simply spoke up. As she spoke, she raised her hand and opened a miniature wormhole. Seeing Wei Lia's familiar behavior, Chen Tao said, "After that, I will ask Katie to arrange a place for you." Villia nodded slightly, said nothing, and walked into the miniature wormhole. Watching Villia's figure disappear into the micro wormhole, watching the micro wormhole slowly close. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. Suddenly, Chen Tao felt his waist tighten slightly, and a soft body came close to him behind him. A faint fragrance came from behind, and a little head poked out from Chen Tao's shoulder. She looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, "Have you fallen in love with her?" Hearing this, Chen Tao turned his face slightly and looked at this beautiful face so close at hand. Chen Tao smiled, turned slightly and looked at Katie in front of him. Katie was simply wearing a gauze skirt that fit her perfect figure. The skirt tied her voluptuous waist, and the bodice held up the fabric high. She had a tall and slender figure. Those legs are long and straight. She has fair skin, long golden hair and a beautiful face. She has a face like an angel and a figure like a devil. This is Katie. Katie saw Chen Tao looking at her. She showed a confident smile, raised her hand, gently put it around Chen Tao's neck, and looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes. Chen Tao leaned down and kissed her. The lips slowly parted. Chen Tao watched as her eyelashes trembled slightly, and her eyes slowly opened, revealing those jewel-like eyes. There was blurred moisture in his eyes. Without saying a word, Chen Tao hugged Katie into his arms. 3 hours later, Chen Tao was lying on the bed, looking at Katie in his arms. Katie closed her eyes, with a happy smile on her face, and nestled her whole body in Chen Tao's arms, letting Chen Tao gently caress her back and comfort her. Chen Tao said, "Before, I encountered a giant dragon with flames on its body. When I killed the giant dragon, the dragon could turn into a human form. I couldn't kill it even with super conceptual weapons. It later discovered that it had a core presence in it." Listen to Chen Tao speak slowly. Katie slowly opened her eyes, raised her face and looked at Chen Tao, a combination of genes and elements. There was a hint of doubt in her eyes. Hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "I think that's the case too, so I want to ask you, have you ever seen such a creature in the future? A collection of genes and elements." Katie frowned slightly, then shook her head and said, "No, in my memory, that kind of creature does not exist. The gene body is the gene body, and the elemental body is the elemental body. It is impossible to combine the two. Unless..." Katie looked at Chen Tao, "They really combined." Chen Tao's heart moved. The child born of the elemental body and the genetic body? Is there no reproductive isolation? Chen Tao looked at Katie. Kadi said, gene bodies have various reproduction processes, and the same goes for elemental bodies. If due to some accident, they come together and this new species is born, although this is very rare, it is not impossible. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and he said, this is quite interesting. Katie's little hand drew circles in front of Chen Tao's chest and said, what are your plans? Intend. Chen Tao looked at Katie and said, I just feel a little novel and don't have any ideas. Those creatures are not enough to threaten our dragon civilization. They can't break away from the order of our dragon civilization, so they don't pay any attention to it. As he spoke, he stroked Katie's hair. Katie slowly closed her eyes. Chen Tao turned over slightly, hugged Katie gently, and said, the most important task now is to balance the male-female ratio in Dragon City as soon as possible. Upon hearing this, Katie slowly opened her eyes, revealing her jewel-like eyes, and she looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao smiled and said, in this case, I'll have to work hard for you. A blush appeared on Katie's face, and she leaned her little head on Chen Tao's chest. It's not hard. Well, let's get started, then. Well. Katie's voice was very soft. With the help of Wei Lia in the dragon civilization, Chen Tao's workload has been greatly reduced. He once again resumed his former leisurely life. You can do whatever you want. This time lasted for half a month. Half a month later, Chen Tao heard the voice from the genetic channel. Chen Tao, hearing this familiar voice, Chen Tao, who had his eyes closed and was soaking in the hot spring, slowly opened his eyes. This is Villia's voice. Chen Tao is very satisfied with the role played by Wei Lia during this period. Now hearing Wei Lia's voice, Chen Tao was in a good mood. He smiled and said, I heard it. Is there anything going on this time? It's been half a month. Villia's voice came slowly. Upon hearing this, Chen Tao's heart moved. Half a month? So fast? Half a month has passed before Chen Tao came back to his senses. Upon hearing this familiar time, Chen Tao knew what Wei Lia was thinking. However, half a month has passed. Villia has dealt with so many things in the universe, and I believe she also knows many powerful men in the universe. Does she have other goals? Realizing this, Chen Tao felt inexplicably uncomfortable. Thinking of Villia really leaving with other men, that scene made Chen Tao feel uncomfortable all over. Chen Tao said, wait for me. Chen Tao got up from the hot spring pool, his body lit up, and he put on his clothes. Chen Tao had a thought and disappeared on the spot. When he appeared again, he appeared in the Dragon King's academy. Chen Tao looked at the huge academy in front of him, and slightly turned his head to look at Villia beside him. Villia had changed her clothes. She was wearing a silver armor and carrying a sword, looking very heroic. Unless she was sleeping, she seemed to be wearing this at any time. It was simply eternal. Warrior, Villia was a natural warrior. But even wearing this armor, Villia's tall figure and beautiful face could not be hidden. A beautiful woman is a beautiful woman no matter how she wears it. It's just that her figure exudes that powerful aura of the king. I believe that many men are respectful to her. Who dares to pursue her? Villia glanced at Chen Tao and said, it's time. Chen Tao looked at Villia and said, what's your decision? Villia retracted her gaze and said, in the past half month, I have been using the Dragon King's Academy to gain knowledge while also using it to find a man who is suitable for me. Chen Tao did not expect this. With the help of the Dragon King's Academy, Villia is estimated to have read all the men in the known universe in the past half month. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 214. In half a month, I got to know no less than 3,000 powerful men in the known universe. Villia said, do you know how I feel? Chen Tao said, how does it feel? Wei Lia continued, the more I get to know you, the more fascinated I become by you. The more I feel that there is no man better than you in this universe. Chen Tao was startled. This answer was beyond Chen Tao's expectation. He looked at Wei Lia. Varia crossed her arms and looked at the Dragon King's academy in front of her. She continued, Dragon civilization guards the balance of the entire universe and is the manager of the entire universe. Every warrior in this civilization is a god in other civilizations. An ordinary existence. But you are the king of this civilization, the king of dragons. Your status is extremely noble. At the same time, you are masculine, kind, and powerful. The strong men who once shook the alien universe with one person's power forced them to leave. Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao and said, if it weren't for the Dragon King's Academy, I wouldn't have known that you would have such incredible legendary deeds. Valia said, you have a powerful charm. Maybe you don't know how powerful your charm is, but I want to tell you. You are the only man in the known universe who can attract me. Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao and said, it's been half a month, and my answer is still very clear. I want you. Wei Lia looked firmly into Chen Tao's eyes with her clear sapphire eyes. She has already said so, so what else does Chen Tao need to say? Chen Tao walked up to Wei Lia and raised his hand. Wei Lia watched Chen Tao's hand getting closer and closer, and her firm eyes trembled slightly at this moment. Chen Tao's hand fell on her cheek. Wei Lia hurriedly turned her face to avoid Chen Tao's hand. Chen Tao was slightly startled and looked at Wei Lia. The base of Wei Lia's ears turned slightly red, and she said, I'm not used to this. This scene gave Chen Tao a sense of novelty, and he couldn't help but smile. It turns out that Queen Vilia, who is so aloof and seems unattainable and arrogant, can be as shy as a little woman? This scene is so interesting. Chen Tao slowly approached Wei Lia, gently put his hands around her waist, and gently held her in his arms. Once in his arms, Chen Tao could feel the stiffness of Vilia's body. She was nervous. Chen Tao smiled and said in her ear, don't be afraid, I will be gentle to you. I'm not afraid, Vilia said. Seeing Wei Lia's nervous expression and red ears, Chen Tao couldn't help but want to laugh out loud. Chen Tao stretched out his hand and hugged Wei Lia into his arms. Wei Lia was slightly startled. She looked at Chen Tao and said, what do you want to do? Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia and said with a smile, don't you want to be my woman? What I have to do now is, of course, to turn you into my real woman. Wei Lia was a little nervous, her body twisted slightly, and she said, I need to prepare. Chen Tao smiled, no, I can help you get ready slowly. Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao's eyes with interest, as if watching a play. She blushed and turned her face away, not daring to look at Chen Tao. Seeing Wei Lia's expression, Chen Tao was happy. The two disappeared into the academy. Came to Chen Tao's bedroom. Chen Tao put Wei Lia on the bed. Wei Lia slowly lay down, and she looked at Chen Tao nervously. Chen Tao lowered his face. The two faces were very close, very close. Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao nervously and said, the only contact I had with men in the past was when I was fighting as a child and hacking and killing during subsequent battles, and I had physical contact. I don't quite understand such things. There was a glint in her eyes, and her eyes were filled with nervousness. Chen Tao looked into her eyes and gently touched her angelic face. He smiled and said, don't worry, just leave it to me. Wei Lia was at a loss. Chen Tao leaned down and kissed her at the right time, soothing her nervous mood. Vilia closed her eyes. Parted lips. Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao with a trace of confusion in her eyes. Chen Tao smiled at her. At this moment, Vilia felt strange. It was obvious that she had successfully pursued him, but Wei Lia discovered that the person being bullied was herself. Vilia felt as if she had sent herself into the mouth of a wolf. Wei Lia shook her head, suppressed this weird thought, and thought to herself, no matter what, I have finally found a man who can control me. 6 hours later. Chen Tao was lying on the bed, looking at the familiar ceiling. He turned his face slightly and looked at Wei Lia beside him. Wei Lia closed her eyes, lying on her side, nestled in Chen Tao's arms. The remaining traces of tears could be seen on her face. She is resting. Looking at the tears on Vilia's face, looking at her pitiful appearance. Chen Tao smiled, turned slightly, and gently touched her cheek with his hand. Maybe it was because he felt Chen Tao's movements. Vilia's eyelashes moved, and she slowly opened her eyes, revealing her sapphire-like eyes. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. Eyes facing each other. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Are you awake?" Wei Lia pursed her lower lip and hid her little head in Chen Tao's arms. "I've always been looking forward to finding a man who can control me, but I didn't expect this to happen." Chen Tao smiled, said nothing, approached her gently, and kissed her forehead. Valia closed her eyes, feeling Chen Tao's tenderness. Her heart was slightly sweet. This feeling was more pleasant than eating honey. "When you kiss my forehead, I don't know why, I feel so happy," Valia said softly. "It's so strange, I didn't feel like this before." Chen Tao smiled, stroked her soft blonde hair, and said, "It's very simple, because you are my woman now." Valia slowly closed her eyes and said, "You are the first man who can make me feel scared, and the first man who can easily change my mood. You seem to have magic, which can make me nervous, scared, and happy. Maybe, this is the feeling of being controlled." "Sure enough, I guessed it right. You are the man I really want, so good," Valia said softly. Chen Tao was slightly startled. He made her feel nervous, Chen Tao knew this, and he made her happy, and he also knew this. But when did Chen Tao make her scared? Chen Tao said, "When did I scare you?" Valia snorted softly, "Did you forget so quickly? Really, you are such a devil." Chen Tao didn't understand. But it didn't matter. Chen Tao gently embraced her in his arms and said softly, "I will treat you well in the future. You are my woman." My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 215. Valia closed her eyes. She also behaved well, and her original tone full of courage became much softer. She was usually like a proud beast, high above everyone, as if she looked down on everyone. But at this moment, she was like a tamed kitten, so obedient that Chen Tao felt distressed. Chen Tao accompanied her gently and rested with her. The next morning, Chen Tao opened his eyes, but found that Valia's figure had disappeared. Seeing this scene, Chen Tao smiled. He didn't care much. Valia is Valia, as a leader, she certainly has a lot of things to do. Valia is probably going to start her work today. Chen Tao slowly got out of bed and went to the bathroom to wash up. He looked at himself in the mirror, and the fear that Valia had said before rang in his mind. He made her afraid? When? Chen Tao's mind flashed. He remembered. At that time, Valia cried and begged him to be gentle, but he ignored her. Was Valia afraid at that time? Thinking of this, Chen Tao couldn't help but smile. It turned out that her fear could be so cute. After confirming his relationship with Valia, Chen Tao completely trusted Valia to manage the dragon civilization. Chen Tao had no doubt about Valia's leadership ability. Time passed by little by little. A month later, as Wang Walai of the fairy civilization, she had dealt with the fairy civilization and came to base number 1. Chen Tao sat on the bench on the deck. A micro wormhole appeared in front of Chen Tao. Vera walked out of the micro wormhole with a cane and appeared in front of Chen Tao. Vera was tall, mature, and had fair skin. The pointed ears and transparent wings added a lot of special exotic style to her. Vera looked at Chen Tao with her sapphire eyes. She slowly lowered her head, saluted, and said, "Vera, meet my king." Chen Tao nodded slightly, "I thought you would delay coming." When Vera heard it, she said, "We, the fairy civilization, will not violate our promises." Chen Tao said, "That would be the best." Vera raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. She said, "Can I go to see Philia first?" Chen Tao said lightly, "Of course." He looked at number 1 next to him and said, "Take her to see Philia." Number 1 nodded slightly, walked to Vera, and said with a smile, "Please follow me, guest." Chen Tao said, "I won't go over, you two can just chat for a while." Vera was slightly startled. She said, "Thank you, my king." After speaking, Vera saw number 1 leave, and she followed him. Vera was a little uneasy. She hadn't been able to contact Philia for a month. Philia became Chen Tao's person for the fairy civilization. How will Chen Tao treat Philia? Will Philia be tortured to the point of collapse? All this troubled Vera, making Vera very frightened and uneasy. Follow number 1 and walk along the corridor. There is a hall in front. Looking at everything in the hall, Vera was slightly startled. 10 pairs. J pairs. No. 3 girls were sitting on the sofa, surrounding a round table, holding poker cards, playing cards and games. One of the 3 girls was Philia. Philia did not notice Vera coming over. She held the poker cards and looked at the girl next to her seriously, waiting for the girl to play a card. This scene stunned Vera. It was completely different from what Vera imagined. Philia was not tortured or injured, but was playing games with others. At this time, one of the girls noticed Vera, her eyebrows slightly stretched, looked at Philia, and said, "Philia, is that your relative?" When Philia heard it, she turned her head and looked behind her. As soon as she saw Vera, Philia's eyes lit up slightly. She quickly stood up, smiled at Vera and said, "Queen Mother." "Queen Mother, is that your mother, Philia?" After hearing this, the girl next to her smiled at Vera and said, "Hello, my name is He Yuxuan." The girl on the other side saw the scene and hurriedly said, "Auntie, hello, my name is Li Xiaolu." Vera was a little confused. She frowned, looked at Philia and said, "What's going on?" Philia was slightly startled, and she said, "They are friends I met here. This is a game prop of the civilization, called playing cards." Vera was slightly stunned, and she said, "He didn't do anything to you." Philia heard it and shook her head, "Chen Tao didn't hurt you." "Queen Mother, it wasn't until I came here that I realized that we all misunderstood Chen Tao. He is different from what we imagined. He is not a bad person. If that's the case, why don't you use the gene channel to contact me?" Vera asked. Vera was talking to Philia in the gene channel, so that no one else could hear. Philia said, "This gene number 1 warship has the ability to isolate the channel connection, so I can't contact you. He doesn't even let you communicate with us. Do you think he's a good person?" Vera's voice was full of doubt. Philia said, "He is indeed a good person, Queen Mother. When you get to know him, you will understand. I think you have been brainwashed by him." Vera certainly doesn't think Chen Tao is a good person. That man used her civilization as a threat and asked her and Philia to serve him together. How could such a person be a good person? No, Queen Mother. It's been almost 2 months now, and my body is still as pure as before I came. He hasn't touched me once," Philia said, "and the people here treat me very sincerely. They are all about my age and are all good people." When Vera heard this, her eyes were a little surprised. "You are still a virgin. This is impossible." In Vera's view, everything else can be understood, but this point, she can't understand. According to Vera's investigation, Chen Tao must be a big pervert. Philia is the first beauty of the fairy civilization, and Philia is by Chen Tao's side. As a pervert, how could he not do something to Philia? This is impossible. Seeing Philia nod, Vera's mind was in a mess. Could it be that she really misunderstood him? Philia smiled and said, and mother, I am quite happy here and very relaxed. This is not the way to treat a captive. Could it be that I am wrong? Vero looked at the sunny smile on Philia's face and fell into deep thought. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 216. Philia looked at Vera's expression, but she didn't know what to do. She could only stand there and obey Vera's instructions as the queen. Vera said, "You come with me, and we will go find him together." When Philia heard this, she nodded. Philia looked at Hyukshuan and Li Xiaolu behind her and said, "I have something to do with my mother, the queen, so I'll leave first and you guys can play first." Hyukshuan and Li Xiaolu looked at each other, and Hyukshuan smiled and said, "Okay." Vero looked at number 1 and said, "I want to see Chen Tao." Number 1 said, "I need to ask the master for instructions. Please wait a moment." Okay, Vera nodded slightly. After a while, number 1 said, "Master, please come with me." Number 1 goes forward. Vera and Philia followed number 1 together. Along the long corridor, the two came to a bedroom. In the bedroom, Chen Tao was sitting on the sofa, making tea and drinking, when he saw two people coming over. Chen Tao said, "Sit down." Vera nodded slightly. She sat down on the sofa in front of Chen Tao. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "My king." Chen Tao looked at Vera and said, "Don't use this title here, just call me Chen Tao." Vera was slightly startled, and she said, "Well, Chen Tao, Philia and I are here now. I want to say business." "Yeah," Chen Tao said, "if you have anything to do, just tell me." Vera said, "We, Bayu, are using a recognition contract with you, and what we want to do is to marry you. To put it simply, we will become your wives. Therefore, our contract is that of a partner." Contract. But, before signing this contract, I have a question. Vera looked at Chen Tao and said, "I heard Philia say that you haven't touched her. Is it because you don't like her?" Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Vera and Philia, and his eyes fell on the mature and beautiful young woman in front of him. He said, "Philia is the most beautiful woman in the goblin civilization. Her beauty is the only one I have ever seen. As a man, it is impossible to say that I am not interested." A blush appeared on Philia's cheeks, and she looked at Chen Tao, with a hint of luster in her blue eyes. Frankly speaking, by now Philia no longer resists Chen Tao. As time goes by, Philia gradually knows how good Chen Tao is. The strength that Chen Tao showed before had already captured Philia's heart, and Chen Tao's gentle care for her afterwards made Chen Tao's figure take root in Philia's heart. Frankly speaking, Philia was even looking forward to it these days, expecting Chen Tao to come to her bedroom and do something to her. But all this time, Chen Tao never showed up. This made Philia feel itchy in her heart, and she even had some self-doubt about her own charm. But now that she heard Chen Tao's definite answer, Philia felt much better. It turned out that she was not unattractive. Vera looked at Chen Tao and said, "Then, why don't you touch her?" Chen Tao looked at Vera and said, "She is indeed very attractive to me, but I am not the kind of person who falls in love with beautiful women when I see them. In our known universe, there are more than tens of billions of beautiful women. If you see one, you will take over one. I think I'll have to make a few more planets." Vera was slightly startled, and she was silent for a moment. Yes, what Chen Tao said is not wrong. After reaching a state like Chen Tao, what kind of woman does he want? If Chen Tao was really a pervert, how could it be possible that there were only these few around him? For a moment, Vera felt a little confused in her head. It turned out that she had misunderstood the man in front of her during this period. But, then why? Vera looked at Chen Tao and said, Then why do you want Philia and I to marry you? Chen Tao crossed his chest with his hands, leaned against the sofa, looked at Vera, and said, if I find an excuse to keep you by my side, how can I restrict your civilization? I don't want the balance of the known universe to be destroyed. Vera was stunned for a moment. She looked at Chen Tao and said, so that's it? Chen Tao said, that's it. As for the marriage contract, you can put it down for the time being. You can live here from now on. I won't ask you to do anything. You can be free and do whatever you want. But the conditions, there is only one: you must stay in the Earth Star civilization and never return to the fairy civilization. Vera was slightly startled. She looked at Chen Tao's firm expression. She opened her mouth and slowly closed it. She said, I understand what you mean. Chen Tao raised his hand, touched the back of his head, and said, although I'm a little sorry for you, this is what I came up with and is the only solution at present. After all, I am not a qualified leader, and the solutions I have are not many. Vera said, don't say that. You are willing to let our civilization live in your universe, and you have also created a planet for us to live in. For us, it is already a great favor. Even if you ask Philia and me to serve you together, and that's what we should do. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Vera and said, if you think so, that's pretty good. Chen Tao looked at number 1 next to him and said, number 1, arrange a bedroom for Vera. It should be close to Philia's bedroom. When number 1 heard this, she nodded and said, okay. Number 1 looked at Vera and said with a smile, guest, please. Vera nodded slightly. She looked at Chen Tao and said, then I'll take my leave first. Yes, Chen Tao nodded slightly. Vera and Philia followed number 1 and left. Vera looked at Philia beside her and said, it seems that I misunderstood him. Philia nodded slightly and said, yes, he is actually completely different from the information we got. As far as I know, the women around Chen Tao basically took the initiative to find him. Vera was startled. She looked at Philia and said, take the initiative? What about Bayu? Philia said, Bayu is just his servant. So far, Bayu and him have not had the things we imagined. Vera nodded slightly. It seems that my misunderstanding is quite big. He is not only not a pervert, but also a gentleman. Yes, Philia said. Guest, this is your bedroom, number 1 said with a smile. Miss Philia's bedroom is just opposite you. Vera nodded slightly and said, thank you for your help. Number 1 said with a smile, that's what I should do. If you have any questions, just call me directly in the Gene channel. I'll go down first. Goodbye. She left. Looking at no one's back, Vera looked at Philia, since you are here, then stay here. Vera retracted her gaze, opened the door of the room, and was about to go in. Mother Queen. Hearing Philia's voice, Vera's footsteps paused slightly, and she turned her head to look at Philia behind her. Philia's cheeks were red. She looked at Vera and said, I seem to have fallen in love with him. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 217. On the other side. Chen Tao sat on the sofa, holding a teacup in his hand, sipping the tea. He raised his head and looked at the pictures in front of him, through which he could see Vera and Philia. Vera and Philia were both talking through the Gene channel, but on base number 1, Chen Tao could hear whatever he wanted to hear. The conversation between the two of them was naturally very clear. Chen Tao was so excited at the time that he thought about following the steps and imitating the method of dealing with the White Jade civilization to deal with the fairy civilization. He thought about keeping Vera as a hostage to restrict the fairy civilization. Chen Tao now wanted to see if these two women could live quietly in this place. Listening to the conversation between Vera and Philia, and hearing Philia always speaking for Chen Tao was in a good mood. Seeing that Vera also changed his attitude towards Chen Tao felt that it seemed that he could calm down next, and the fairy civilization did not need to pay more attention. But when Chen Tao was about to turn off the screen, he happened to hear what Philia suddenly said to Vera. Chen Tao was slightly startled. Fall in love? Who did Philia fall in love with? In the picture. Vera was also stunned. She stared at Philia in a daze. What? Vera was a little confused. Philia lowered her head slightly and said, I feel that I have fallen in love with the man named Chen Tao. Hearing this, Chen Tao was choked by a mouthful of tea and he coughed violently. Cough, cough, cough. Vera looked at her daughter in front of her with a slightly red face but firm eyes, and Vera's eyes were shining. She slowly adjusted her mood, nodded slowly, and said, It's understandable, he is strong and very attractive. But you like him, does he know about this? Philia shook her head. Vera said, Do whatever you want, our fairy civilization is an open and above-board civilization. If you like him, tell him. As for whether he agrees or not, it's his business. Philia nodded. Vera retracted her sight, entered the bedroom, stretched out her hand, held the door, looked back at Philia, and then slowly closed the door. Looking at the closed door, Philia retracted her gaze, and she seemed to have mustered up her courage and walked towards Chen Tao's bedroom. Chen Tao looked through the screen and saw Philia coming over here. He was a little confused. What's going on? Chen Tao adjusted his mood. He looked at the clothes soaked in tea on his body. He got up and walked towards the bathroom. He went into the bathroom and took a shower. Mr. Chen, halfway through the shower, Chen Tao heard Philia's voice. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao was silent for a while and said, I'm taking a shower, wait for me. Yeah, Philia's voice was delicate. After Chen Tao took a shower, he wrapped himself in a bathrobe and went out. He looked at Philia. Philia was wearing a thin gauze skirt, and she sat on the sofa gracefully. She had golden hair and a pair of sapphire-like eyes, and she was tall and slender. Transparent wings and pointed ears, exuding an exotic style. Her fair skin was like jade, very beautiful. Her beauty is different from other women. She is the kind of beauty that is out of this world and not in the world. This is the princess of the fairy civilization, Philia. The charming Philia. When Philia saw Chen Tao, her eyes were shining, and a smile appeared on her face. She said, Mr. Chen. Chen Tao said, What's the matter? Philia's face slowly flushed. She looked at Chen Tao and said, I like you. Chen Tao was silent for a while. He looked at the beautiful woman in front of him who was so beautiful that she was not in the world, and felt her beauty that seemed to be inviolable. Philia seemed to have a kind of magic that made Chen Tao's brain go blank. He couldn't help but move his feet, and approached Philia without saying a word. Philia was slightly startled. Chen Tao raised his hand and held Philia horizontally in his arms. Philia's face turned red. She rested her hand on Chen Tao's chest uneasily, looked at Chen Tao, and said, Mr. Chen, what are you doing? You haven't answered me yet. Chen Tao put Philia on the bed. He looked at her face and said, I'll answer you now. Philia blushed. He leaned down and kissed Philia. Philia slowly closed her eyes. Is this the answer? This is the answer. 3 hours later. Chen Tao put on his clothes and sat on the edge of the bed. He looked back at Philia lying on the bed with her eyes closed. He raised his hand and touched the back of his head. Chen Tao felt like a horse running away. His emotions, feelings and desires were all difficult to control. Chen Tao got up, and his figure disappeared. When he appeared again, he returned to Yuehu Manor. Master, the voice of number 10 came. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao nodded slightly, and he didn't say anything. A black lightning appeared beside Chen Tao, and the car door opened. Chen Tao got in the car and drove away from Yuehu Manor. Contradiction. Chen Tao felt that what he did was wrong, but as a man, How could he control himself in such a situation? But as more and more women came to him, he felt a strong sense of guilt. This sense of guilt made Chen Tao very conflicted. Chen Tao closed his eyes. Xingyun, am I doing this right? According to the probability in my database, the master's approach is not wrong. The reason why the master is uncomfortable is because of the deep-rooted ideological constraints. This kind of thing is not uncommon in the known universe. Xingyun's mechanical voice sounded. Listening to this voice, Chen Tao was silent. He spread his perception. At this moment, he is the universe, and the universe is him. Reach the height of the universe to think about the problem in front of Chen Tao. Chen Tao felt the two words stupid. Survival of the fittest, excellent genes can continue to be passed on, and there are more females around is the law of nature. If the genes are not good, they will naturally be eliminated. This is the theorem of nature and the universal theorem of the gene body. Chen Tao's guilt is the stupidest thing. Chen Tao slowly opened his eyes, and in an instant, he figured it out. There was a smile on his face. His mood also relaxed. He got the answer, he was not wrong. Maybe he felt that he had failed Ziking, but in fact, Ziking did not feel that she had failed him, and Ziking's life was not painful. Now Ziking only had joy and happiness. With more sisters, there were more people who could accompany Ziking and share her happiness. In this case, why did Chen Tao always worry about trivial matters? As long as he was happy and the people around him were happy, then what did everything else matter? Why did he have such a sense of guilt? Thinking of this, Chen Tao drove the black lightning back. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 218. Chen Tao returned to the bedroom of base number 1. He looked at Philia, who was sleeping soundly on the bed. He smiled, slowly walked to the edge of the bed and sat down, lying next to Philia, looking at Philia's exquisite and perfect face. She had long golden hair, which was naturally draped behind her, revealing her fair cheeks and pointed ears. With her creamy white skin, her beauty was simply shocking. If such a woman were seen by those scouts on Earth, they would inevitably find something similar to Fang Shueqing. Chen Tao's hand gently fell on her cheek, lifted the few strands of knotty hair that were attached to her cheek, and put them behind her ears. Then, he leaned close to Philia's face and kissed her lips. Lips parted. Chen Tao looked at her beautiful face, and there was a hint of tenderness in his eyes. Such a beautiful woman, and she also took the initiative to show her kindness to him. As a man, who can resist? Anyway, Chen Tao couldn't resist. Philia may have sensed something. Her eyelashes moved and she slowly opened her eyes, revealing a pair of clear gemstone-like eyes. She looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes. Philia smiled slightly when she met Chen Tao's gaze and said, "Good man." Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Do you think I'm a good man?" Philia slowly hid her little head in Chen Tao's arms and whispered, "You are Philia's good man." Chen Tao smiled. Chen Tao's hand fell behind her, gently stroking her back, soothing her little emotions. He said gently, "I treat you and your mother like this, will you be unhappy?" Philia shook her head and said softly, "No, Philia is the same in the fairy civilization. The place where she can move every day is that battleship. That battleship is not as big as your battleship, and there are many rules. But here, I can play with my sisters, play poker, or talk about how to use genes. I find it quite interesting." While speaking, she drew circles on Chen Tao's chest with her little hand. She whispered, "I just don't know if the Queen Mother will like it. If the Queen Mother likes it, it's good." Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled. He slowly pinched Philia's chin and raised her face. He looked at her beautiful eyes, then slowly bent down and kissed her lips. For a long time, slowly separated. Chen Tao looked at Philia's confused eyes, and said with a smile, "Come, let me love you well." Philia's face flushed, She looked at Chen Tao shyly, and hummed softly, "Okay." Chen Tao's heart knot has been untied, and once the heart knot is untied, he completely let himself go. He is like a beast bound by reins, and at this moment, the reins have been completely broken. Chen Tao does whatever he wants. 6 hours later, Chen Tao got out of bed and put on his clothes. He glanced at Philia, who was lying on the bed, closing her eyes and falling asleep. Chen Tao retracted his sight and went out on his own. At the same time, Vera had just finished taking a shower. She changed into a thin gauze skirt, lay on the bed, and looked at the strange ceiling in front of her. For Vera, she has lived for 1,000,000 years, and in these 1,000,000 years, she has been the queen of the fairy civilization. The pressure of being a queen made her breathless. It's hard to have time to relax. And now Vera found that she could finally relax a little, even though she was a prisoner. Vera closed her eyes and planned to take a nap. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Dong dong. Hearing the knock, Vera opened her eyes quickly, got up, sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the door, and said, "Who?" "It's me." Chen Tao's voice came from outside the door. Hearing this voice, Vera breathed a sigh of relief. "Is it Chen Tao?" Vera was very wary of Chen Tao before, but after learning about Chen Tao from Vera, she was not so nervous. Vera walked to the door, raised her hand and opened the door. Chen Tao saw Vera in front of him. Vera was wearing a thin white silk gauze skirt, which was close to her delicate figure, and the skirt was tied around her slender waist. The upper part held up the fabric high, and the arc was only comparable to zicking and rose. The skirt is very short, and below it is a pair of long, straight legs. She is wearing a pair of white jade high heels, which makes her already tall figure even taller. She has long golden hair, which falls naturally on her shoulders. Her face is beautiful and charming, with big eyes and small lips. She exudes a unique charm that is unique to mature women, which makes people feel a little irresistible. Blue eyes and pointed ears add a bit of exotic style to her. Looking at the mature woman in front of him, Chen Tao's heartbeat speeds up slightly. Beauty and maturity plus this perfect figure are enough to ignite the fire of anyone. Vera didn't notice anything wrong. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Come in." With that, Vera turned her back to Chen Tao and entered the house. In this way, Chen Tao could see Vera's moving back. She has a slender waist and long legs. That back is simply as beautiful as a painting. Chen Tao walked over, stretched out his big hands, closed them, and hugged Vera, holding her in his arms. Vera's body stiffened slightly, she was a little at a loss. She turned her face slightly, looked at Chen Tao and said, "What are you doing?" Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at the beautiful face in front of him. He looked at Vera and said, "Have you forgotten? You are now my woman, don't you know what I want to do?" Vera was stunned. What's going on? Didn't Philia say that this man is not a pervert? What's going on now? Why would he do such a thing? While Vera was confused, Chen Tao picked her up horizontally and walked to the bed. Vera's face turned slightly pale. She looked at Chen Tao. Knowing that she couldn't escape, Vera could only choose to close her eyes silently, with her little head leaning on Chen Tao's arms. The morning of the third day, Chen Tao lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling above. After a while, Chen Tao felt a movement around him. He came back to his senses and looked at the blonde beauty beside him. Vera's eyes slowly opened, with a glimmer in her eyes, and I don't know what she was thinking. Seeing Vera's expression, Chen Tao turned his head slightly, looked at her, and said, "What are you thinking about?" Hearing this, Vera said, "Nothing." Chen Tao smiled, raised his hand, gently stroked her cheek, put her hair behind her ear, then pinched her chin and raised her face. He looked into her eyes and said, "Compared to Philia's father, how am I?" Vera looked at Chen Tao and said, "Philia is my adopted daughter, I don't have a husband." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 219. Hearing this, Chen Tao was slightly startled. He looked at Vera's clear eyes. Chen Tao showed an awkward smile, loosened his hand, fell on her shoulder, and said, "Sorry, I don't know." Vera didn't look at Chen Tao either. Looking at Vera's expression, Chen Tao didn't know what to say. He originally thought that Philia was her daughter, but Chen Tao never thought that this daughter was just an adopted daughter. In other words, Vera may not have experienced such a thing. Chen Tao said softly, "Sorry, I didn't pay attention to your feelings." "It's okay," Vera said lightly, "I'm used to it." The lukewarm voice made Chen Tao a little awkward. Chen Tao looked at Vera's little face. She had no expression on her face, and it was impossible to tell her current mood. Chen Tao slowly hugged her in his arms and said gently, "After that, I will treat you well." Feeling Chen Tao's tenderness, Vera closed her eyes. "I don't quite believe you. 3 days ago, you said you wouldn't touch me, but look at what you have done in the past 3 days," Vera said softly. Chen Tao smiled, "I promise." Vera pursed her lips, "Our fairy civilization is a holy and pure civilization. We have always been monogamous. As long as a female fairy has a relationship with another person, she will follow that man for the rest of her life. No matter how life goes, she will always accompany the other person. The same is true for male fairies. Your side is different from ours, but I am a female fairy, so I will abide by the rules of my side." At this point, Chen Tao's heart moved, and he said softly, "In other words, you have accepted this identity." Vera hid her little head in Chen Tao's arms. "No matter what your purpose is, I am yours now. I just ask you to be nice to me." Feeling the helplessness in Vera's voice, Chen Tao smiled, kissed her forehead, and said, "I promise to be nice to you." Vera closed her eyes and was hugged in Chen Tao's arms. She felt better. "Well, dear. If you have a good rest, we will continue." Hearing Chen Tao's voice, Vera's face couldn't help but blush, and she was a little at a loss. Seeing that Vera didn't respond, Chen Tao took her as her acquiescence. A morning passed unknowingly. Chen Tao put on his clothes, sat on the bed, leaned against the headboard, and looked at the bathroom. Not long after, the bathroom door opened. A beautiful figure appeared in front of Chen Tao. It was Vera. Vera's face was red, and she stood at the door of the bathroom. She looked at Chen Tao. "Is this okay?" Under Chen Tao's arrangement, Vera put on a dress that only Earth civilization has. It was a set of off-shoulder tight dress miniskirt. She showed her thin collarbone and round shoulders. The close-fitting fabric was close to her slender waist, and the upper body held the fabric high. The skirt was very short, and the perfect pair of jade legs were wrapped in white stockings, and she was stepping on a pair of white high heels. Her long golden hair naturally draped over her shoulders. Her face was quite in line with the facial features of an Oriental beauty, but her skin was as white as cream, just like that of a Western woman, but without a single pore or flaw, very delicate and fair. At this moment, she looked like a beautiful CEO, but more charming, with a mature and beautiful charm that made people unable to stop. She had folded the wings behind her, leaving only the pointed ears. She was tall and slender, and with the high heels, she was a full 1.75 meters tall. Very tall and pleasing to the eye. With the perfect temperament of a mature woman, any man would probably find it difficult to look away once his eyes fell on her. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Very beautiful, very suitable." He stood up and came to Vera. Vera saw this, stretched out her hand and took Chen Tao's arm. Chen Tao took Vera out of the bedroom. The two came to the dining room. It was lunchtime now. The girls gathered in the dining hall. Seeing Chen Tao and Vera coming over, the girls' eyes were attracted one after another. As they looked at the scene in front of them, they couldn't help but have a little more doubt on their faces. Blonde Fairy, seeing this, Rose smiled and crossed her arms. She is so beautiful that people envy her. Li Xiaolu's eyes were shining with a hint of light. Ziking also smiled and looked over here. Philia, who was standing by, saw this scene, and her eyes were full of doubt and confusion. On the other hand, Vera's face turned slightly red, and she turned her face slightly to look at Chen Tao. She didn't dare to look at these sisters. Chen Tao looked around, he smiled and said, "Baby, welcome your new sister." Philia. When Philia heard this, her little face turned red. She didn't want to let her sisters know about her relationship with Chen Tao so quickly, but she didn't expect Chen Tao to directly announce her relationship with him. Everyone's eyes fell on Philia. Philia's face flushed, and she looked at Chen Tao shyly, looking very cute. Philia stood up slowly at Chen Tao's signal. Sister Philia Lin was the first to speak, and she said with a smile, "We will be sisters in the future, just call me Sister Lin." Philia hummed and said, "Sister Lin." "Sister Philia, then you can call me Sister Yuxuan," Yuxuan said with a smile. Upon hearing this, Philia nodded slightly, "Sister Yuxuan." Ziching smiled and said, "Just call me by my name, just like before." When Yuxuan heard this, she looked at Ziching, and she quickly looked at Philia, "Then you can also call me by my name." Hearing this, Philia was happy and smiled, "Okay. Okay, I don't think there is any need to change the name," Wu Yao said with a smile, "Let Philia be the same as before, just call us those." Agree. Yuxuan was the first to raise her hand. The others smiled and seemed to have no objection. Seeing that her sisters were so friendly, Philia's nervousness dissipated. There was a smile on her face and she looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao smiled at Philia and nodded slightly. Philia blushed and sat down slowly. Chen Tao said, "There is another sister, the queen of the fairy civilization, Vera." Vera's face turned red. She looked at everyone and said, "Hello." "Hello." Ziching smiled and said, "My name is Ziching, just call me by my name." "My name is Rose." "I'm Lin." "I am Wu Yao." "I am Yuxuan." My name is Li Xiaolu." Li Xiaolu was timid. Seeing this and hearing this, Vera smiled and said, "My name is Vera." Chen Tao said with a smile, "Okay, the introductions have been made, let's eat." My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 220. Fortunately, this dining table is oval-shaped and very long, so it is not a problem to seat dozens of people. Eating lunch. Vera on the side looked at Chen Tao next to her. She looked away and said, "My dear, do you have any ideas next time?" Upon hearing this, Chen Tao glanced at Vera and said, "What?" Vera said, "You have the 6th generation of creation genes. Your genes are powerful enough to be called a god. If you are willing, I think no one in the entire universe can be your opponent. If my dear, yes, if you have an idea, I think you can take action against other small universes at any time and make them surrender to you." Hearing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. Before Chen Tao could say anything, someone helped Chen Tao answer the question. "Husband is not interested in conquest or anything like that." Rose smiled. Vera looked at Rose. Rose crossed her arms over her chest, with a smile on her pretty little face, and said, "My husband is a person who yearns for peace. The reason why he became the leader of the dragon civilization is just to contribute to peace. Let my husband. It is impossible to conquer other people or conquer other universes." Vera's eyes glowed, and she said, "If we don't take the initiative, I'm worried that this universe will become a battlefield." "Battlefield?" Chen Tao looked at Vera and said, "What?" Vera said, there are many small universes within the big universe, and in those small universes, there are also many powerful beings. As far as I know, there is a small universe near us. The technology in those small universes is powerful, and some people have successfully upgraded to the third level. Those people of the fifth generation think they are the strongest beings in the universe, but if you let them know about your existence, they will definitely come to find you. Are you going to die? Wu Yao frowned and said, you know that the other party is stronger than you, and you still come here to die. Vera said, the sixth generation gene body is a legendary existence. It can be said that it does not exist. They have never seen it, and they will not believe that it exists. They heard that it exists here. Naturally, we have to verify it. After all, with the power of their genes, they are not afraid of anything. Vera looked at Chen Tao and said, in other words, my dear, if you don't take the initiative to go to the outside universe and show your strength, the other party will take the initiative to come over and let you show it. Hearing this, Chen Tao frowned slightly and said, what you said is correct. Chen Tao had already met a guy who came to trouble Chen Tao out of curiosity. There is one, and there is certainly the possibility of a second. What Vera said cannot be wrong. Haha, suddenly, a voice sounded on the public genetic channel. Everyone in the room heard this sound. Chen Tao frowned. The woman is right, I'm already here. The faint voice was full of confidence. Vera frowned, the Black Ming of the sixth universe. Haha, a person from a low-level cosmic civilization can actually know his name. It seems that my name, He Ming, has resounded throughout the entire universe. He Ming's voice was filled with pride. Chen Tao's eyes fell on Vera. Universe 6? He Ming. Vera nodded slightly and said, there are countless universes in the big universe, but among these countless universes, there are 10 universes with numbers. Because in these 10 universes, they all have fifth generation genes. The super powerful people call themselves the god of the universe, and this He Ming is the super powerful person of the sixth universe, the god of the universe. God of the universe, that's really funny, Rose said lightly, it's just a genetic body with slightly stronger technology. Haha, a gene body with stronger technology. It's interesting. A low-level cosmic civilization can actually have such arrogant people. As the words fell, a dark shadow appeared on the dining table. Chen Tao took a closer look and found a man in black clothes standing on the dining table. The man looked similar to a human from Earth, but the pair of jet black wings behind him and the single horn on his forehead made him look very different. It seems a little weird. He looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao saw that his eyes were pitch black, but inside the black eyes, vertical shapes similar to cat pupils could be seen. With these wings, one horn, and these cat eyes, it can be determined that this person is not from the Earth star. And you must know that in this base number 1, the functions of genes are restricted. Although Chen Tao has not strengthened the restriction ability of gene number 1, it is still very difficult to easily use wormhole calculations to get in. Is this guy really a fifth generation gene body? He Ming stared at Chen Tao and said calmly, are you the legendary sixth generation gene body? Hearing this, Chen Tao stretched his eyebrows slightly and said, coming to other people's homes and standing at other people's dining tables is a very unqualified behavior. Is your universe so unqualified? When He Ming heard this, he looked at the dining table at his feet. The corners of his mouth twitched, and then he jumped down from the dining table. He pulled up a chair and sat down, with his hands folded around his chest, his legs crossed, and his eyes looking at Chen Tao said, hurry up and eat, and then have a fight with me after eating. He Ming looked careless. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at He Ming and said, why should I fight you? He Ming's eyebrows wrinkled slightly. He sat up, looked at Chen Tao, and said, don't you want to fight? That's fine. He looked at the women beside him. He Ming said, if you don't fight, I will kill all these women. After saying that, he looked at Chen Tao and said, "How's it going? Now, do you have a reason to fight me?" Chen Tao's face suddenly sank. Dragons have reverse scales, and so do humans. The woman next to Chen Tao is his reverse scale, and this guy is not polite at all, stepping on Chen Tao's reverse scale as soon as he makes a sound. Chen Tao squinted his eyes, stared at Haiming, and said, "Okay, I'll fight you." The words fell. Chen Tao and Haiming disappeared from the spot. When the two appeared again, they appeared in a remote corner millions of light years away from the solar system. After Haiming noticed that the environment around him had changed, his expression changed and the smile disappeared. He looked at Chen Tao in disbelief. What did you do?" Chen Tao crossed his chest with his hands, looked at Haiming, and said calmly, "Aren't you going to fight me? Then I will satisfy you." "No. No." Haiming's face turned pale and he hurriedly said, "I won't fight, I won't fight." A voice of flesh and blood sounded. Haiming's body was broken into two pieces. Seeing this scene, Haiming's pupils were trembling. He is the fifth-generation genetic body. His body is so hard that very few things in the universe can destroy his body, and now he is cut into two pieces like this.